You were created not just for good times, but for dark times. And if you don't keep your eyes open in dark seasons, you cannot see how God is moving. Too often, when we strategize, we're only planning for things to go well. When you face off with the devil in private, you learn a thing or two about the devil, that he's all smoke and mirrors, that he don't have no power, that no weapon formed against you will prosper. When you received God, you also received God's enemies. I wonder how much different your strategy would be if you planned for dark seasons. Not so that you can give up, but so that you can survive them. Sometimes your obedience is someone else's threat. My text is Matthew 4, verse 12. Context is Jesus has been baptized by John the Baptist. After he was baptized, the Spirit led him up into the wilderness, where he was tempted by the devil for 40 days and 40 nights. And when we find Jesus in the text, he has received news about John the Baptist. And verse 12 says, "Now when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he departed to Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is by the sea in the regions of Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And upon those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned." From that time, Jesus began to preach and to say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." If I were to turn the lights off in this room right now, after panic ensued for a few seconds, it would take about 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust to the darkness in the room. Your eyesight is still not ever as sharp as it was when the lights were on. You know this because when you're in your room and you turn the lights off, it takes you a minute. And these German engineers in 1939 must have understood that in order for them to have an advantage in war, they could not be relegated to just fighting in the light. They had to find a way to take advantage of the darkness. And so in World War II, they began working on a technology that would allow them to have an advantage to fight in darkness. Because while darkness intimidated most people, it made most people feel like maybe I cannot fight any longer because it's dark. There was a different way of thinking that suggested maybe there is a way that I can utilize darkness for my advantage. I have to have a strategy in darkness. We don't always create our strategies to survive dark times. We don't even know what dark times to anticipate. And so we have strategies that are contingent on light times. Sometimes in marriage, it's not about the beautiful moments that you see in the fairy tales and the rom-coms. Marriage is really tested in those dark seasons where you're just feeling one another out, where you don't even know where you end or they begin, because life has changed so rapidly that you're in a dark season. My father told me one time when I was getting remarried, and he told me, I want you to think about marriage in this way. You are picking the person you want standing next to you when you're lowering me in the ground. We're not talking about who you want to cuddle with. We're not talking about who's going to be funny. We're talking about who you want to be with you in a dark season. I wonder how much different your strategy would be if you planned for dark seasons. Not so that you can give up, but so that you can survive them. I want you to start planning for a dark season and how you will overcome that dark season. What's the worst thing that could happen? I could lose the job not work out, but you know what? I'll still have my mind. I'll still have the Spirit of God on the inside of me. I'll still have this marriage. I may go through a dark season, but I'm gonna go through that dark season. That dark season doesn't get to hold me. I know that I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their seed begging for bread. But I also know that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. So my plan for dark seasons is I'm gonna learn to praise and worship. But I want you to understand that God created you to see in the dark, because he needs you to understand that you were created not just for good times, but for dark times. And if you don't keep your eyes open in dark seasons, you cannot see how God is moving. I wish I had some like real, authentic people in this room who would tell you about a time when they were in the darkest season of their life. I don't mean no cute dark. I mean, I don't want to live no more dark. How did you go from being in that dark of a season to where you are now? How did you go from that depression that was on your spirit into who you are today, unless we serve a God who knows how to move in the dark? I was thinking about the 10th plague for the children of Israel when Exodus would not let them go. And God tells them to take the blood of the lamb and put it over the doorpost. And at night, he's going to pass through. And wherever there's blood over the doorpost, he'll pass over. What that reveals to me about the character of God is that even in dark seasons, God knows whose he is. The whole world could have dark over it, but God knows who's his even in the dark season. God says, I can see that blood even in the dark. You gave up on yourself in the dark, but God couldn't give up on you, because even in the dark, I know who you are. Even in the dark, I know you're still mine. Even in the dark, I know you still got potential to do everything I've called you to do, because I can see. No question then why Paul, of all people, prepared the church for what it means to receive this revelation of who Jesus is. Because Paul knows a thing or two about dark seasons. And this is what he tells the church over and over again, whether it's the church of Ephesus, the church in Rome. He prepares them over and over again for the reality that there's going to be suffering, that this isn't going to be easy, because God will never let you walk into a dark season unprepared. Paul wants them to understand that your faith is going to be tested in the dark. Ephesians 6:12 and 13, you all know this scripture. He's preparing the church of Ephesus, and he tells them, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the... This is a spiritual battle. When you received God, you also received God's enemies. So all hell is going to break out against you. Paul says you can win this battle. Take me to verse 13. He says, so you're going to have to put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. He's giving them a strategy. He says, put on the whole armor of God, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of the gospel of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. By the time you put all this on, you're going to be heavy and you're going to be tired. But that's all you got to do is put it on. I'm not asking you to swing it. I'm just asking you to put it on. Sometimes we put on pieces of the armor. But when you're in a dark season, you can't afford to have the sword of the Spirit in your mouth. You can't have the helmet of salvation and be ready to throw hands. You're going to need your whole armor for this fight. When we find Jesus in the text, he's entering into a dark season. I think it's important for us to understand that Jesus himself faces dark seasons. God gave me this text, and he wanted me to be able to see how Jesus functions in a dark season. John has been arrested. Jesus hasn't even fully stepped into public ministry at this time, which means that before he can even get started, he can tell he's starting from a place of already having enemies. He also recognizes that the culture and political climate of that time is at tension, and that he has a word and a revelation that is going to continue to disrupt the tension of that time and era. He's been called to preach the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But him preaching about the kingdom of heaven being at hand is a disruption to other kingdoms. Sometimes your obedience is someone else's threat, and he knows that. But he's got to obey anyway, which means my obedience is leading me into the dark. This is the Jesus who was fresh off his fast. He's fresh off of facing off with the devil in the wilderness. And something happens when you face off with the devil in the dark that equips you and empowers you to face off with the devil in the public. Too many of us are asking God about our public purpose. And what can I do in the earth on your behalf? And I hear God saying, if you really want to do something for me, I want you to face off with your devil in private. When you face off with the devil in private, you learn a thing or two about the devil, that he's all smoke and mirrors, that he don't have no power, that his plans fall apart, that no weapon formed against you will prosper. You got to go to war the devil in your own prayer life. You got to be willing to fast and pray and get into your own wilderness so that you recognize that that devil that once tempted you no longer has power over you. As a matter of fact, you got power over him, because if you let it start at home, when I send you into the marketplace, when I send you on the front lines of the church, when I send you into the political system, you won't back down when the devil throws something your way, because you already know no weapon formed against me will prosper. You will already know that greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. How do I know this? Because I faced off with the devil in the wilderness. I looked the devil in the eyes. I told addiction, you got to get off of me. I told depression, I'm going to therapy. I wish you knew who you were sitting next to. You sitting next to somebody who's had to face off with the devil in real life. I looked him in the eye. He said my name. He wanted to take me. He wanted to hold me. But you looking at a woman that got loose. Loose that woman and let her go. Loose that man and